Hi, everyone. Welcome to our December edition of Startup Grind Amsterdam. It's almost 7, so I think we're going to get started. Anybody who's coming in late, we'll catch them up to speed. But for those of you who weren't here for our first edition, or first edition back from kind of being on hiatus for a year, welcome. My name is Pete. I'm the co-director along with Dan, one of the boxes in your screen, and he will be interviewing Bruno today, who will be chatting more about his kind of entrepreneurial journey. I'm super excited for this because I have also started my entrepreneurial journey. First-time entrepreneur. I joined Peak Capital a few months ago, and I'm currently building my own startup. So really looking forward to learning more about this. Speaking of Peak, they were kind enough to sponsor us this month. So a little plug for them. Basically, if you're thinking about raising money, you want to know more about what startups should do if they want to raise money, happy to have a free call with you. Just ping me after this, either in the chat or you can find me on LinkedIn very easily. Also wanted to give a shout out to one of our partners, Spin Ideas. Veronica is here in the chat room if you want to reach out to her. She is super connected in Amsterdam. I think she knows everybody. She runs a digital marketing agency. So if there's anything that you need help with around connecting in Amsterdam or marketing, I highly recommend connecting with her. Other than that, yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with Startup Grind or not, but what we're trying to do here is basically create a community of entrepreneurs in Amsterdam. Grind is active around the world. It's probably one of the largest entrepreneur communities. But what Dan and I found in Amsterdam was that community was limiting a bit. The goal is really to create the hub, the connector hub of entrepreneurs. So yes, we're starting a bit small, and obviously with COVID, it's making things a little bit more challenging. But as things hopefully start to return next year to normal and we can start gathering, we really have plans for this. So if you're interested in sponsoring, partnering with us, please reach out. If you know other entrepreneurs who might be interested in connecting with us, please connect them with us. Really, it takes community to make this work. Dan and myself are kind of the faces of this. They probably could have selected prettier faces, but hey, we're making it work with what we luckily, we have Bruno here to raise our game a bit. Important enough for me so I'm going to hand it over to Dan and Bruno and step aside. But what I will say, if any questions come up during the interview that you'd like to have asked, please ask the chat bar, and I'll pick some of those questions. All right, Dan, I'll let you take it from here.
Cool. Thank you, Pete. I just want to say one more quick word about Startup Grind. Right, we have our 3 values that we believe in here. It's 1, we want to make quality connections, not just contacts. We believe in giving first, and along with that, we want to help others before you help yourself. And it's certainly, excuse me, certainly that last one that really builds the sense of community that we're trying to create here in Amsterdam. So about me, I'm the other co-director of Startup Grind Amsterdam. As Pete mentioned, this is our 2nd meetup of Startup Grind Amsterdam version 2.0, and it's also our holiday meetup. Joining us today is Bruno. He is a serial entrepreneur from Amstelveen, currently the owner of AI Applied. He has a very extensive education and work history in AI. Bruno, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
So I'd really like to just kind of get in it. Can you kind of tell me what it is that AI Applied does?
I'm going to give it a try. I mean, we're working on this pitch continuously, so it changes. What we do with AI Applied is basically apply advanced text analytics these days onto some real challenges that corporations, in our case, mostly banks and insurance companies, struggle with. So to give you just a quick example of one of those things, for instance, a lot of banks give out mortgages, and when they give out the mortgage, they also give out the mortgage advice, in which they try to summarize everything that's in there. And then from the regulatory side, but also from the internal quality management side, they need to check all of these advices for correctness against a plethora of factors. It's kind of impossible to check all of them, so they always have to work with a sample. And what we do is we help them with the selection by training AI models that will take out those reports that are most likely to be, incorrect. That they really need to have somebody look at them before they get out. So we reduce regulatory risk.
I want to know this. It seems like a very specialized service that you're offering here. How did you kind of uncover this need in the local market?
That's a great question. I mean, in order to explain that, I have to harken back a little bit to how we started AI Applied and how they're rolling. Which is, during my studies of artificial intelligence at the University of Amsterdam, which I started in 2001, by the way, so way before it was cool. My best friend Mark and I figured out that we're learning quite a lot of really interesting stuff that basically nobody's using on real world problems. So why not jump into what we perceived as a hole in the market and try to conquer it a bit. This was in 2007. To most companies that we had access to, if you would mention artificial intelligence, the immediate counter question would be what? In the beginning, we had to do all kinds of stuff. As the time progressed, we realized that we cannot do everything and that we have to specialize. So we specialized in text processing, and we really tried to be really good at that. And because we were active in the B2B sector and because we were working mostly through partners, we ended up at these big institutions such as banks, insurance companies, but also energy companies, stuff like that. Really, with them, we would look at where do you guys have the need? So basically, what problems are you having, and what can we help you with? And we would do this in different formats. So sometimes in a workshop format, like let's have a look at the problems that you're having that have to do with text, and that can actually be plausibly solved by machines to the necessary degree now. So the specific service that we're offering now to banks, the one which I mentioned, this is something that actually came as a request to us through one of our partners, which is Consulting in this particular case. Okay. They were the first ones to uncover this with a large bank, but it comes from a cooperation that we built over long term.
But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. AI Applied wasn't the first company you founded that was kind of AI focused, was it?
AI Applied was, and then subsequently we also founded or co-founded KingCorp. Okay. And Difference AI, and actually there is another company coming up probably January 1st.
So you're saying you're currently running 3 separate startups?
Not quite. So I'm involved with 3 separate startups. Okay. I would say that my focus right now is on the new development, the one that's going to be launching in January. But obviously, I'm laterally involved to some degree in 2 of the other 3 that I mentioned, because Difference AI is actually something that we're going to be spinning down. Okay. At Difference, we tried to build an advanced image processing technology that would manifest itself in its first iteration as a game. We did some testing. We tested the market as well, and we realized that this probably wasn't as good an idea. So we're going to be shutting that one down.
Yeah, I mean, I can get it, because certainly, every startup goes ups and downs and pivots, and they don't all work. But it seems to me you're operating in several different verticals here, right? Like, can you talk to us just a little bit about where these ideas come from? Like what do you wake up in the morning and you just start, or is there some process to it?
Right. That's a good question. I mean, obviously, originally I'm kind of an engineer by training, so I have that handicap that a lot of engineers have to wake up in the morning, look at the technology that you're working with, see the whole enormous potential that this technology could be applied to, and just want to and without being able to stop yourself, want to work on all of these things at the same time. So one of the things that I've learned is that that's the worst way to approach it. because most of the time you end up with a solution that's looking for a problem. So the way that we do it now is actually we use what's happening at AI Applied because our clients come to us for a combination of technology and services.
Mm-hmm.
But you see that a particular query that's coming from the clients repeats itself in an abstract form over a certain period of time. That for us is a realization that there is actually a problem looking for a solution.
Mm-hmm.
So that then generates usually a little proof of concept that we build internally to see if we can build this out along general lines.
Mm-hmm.
Then we immediately have potential customers that are quite willing to test it with us and to see whether this actually does solve their problem. And then we can make a reasonably good estimate about what would be necessary investment-wise, feature-wise, etc., market research-wise, etc., to indeed field this as a separate product. And if the product actually turns out to be running successfully, perhaps as a separate company.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the approach that we take now, but it took us basically the better part of 10 or 11 years to learn that this is the way to do it, at least in the regions where.
Sure. For people either watching now or watching later on YouTube who are thinking about starting up something of their own, right? For example, Pete, I'm actually starting something as well. And I feel like sometimes I struggle with that initial validation of my ideas. Like I worry that I'm building something just for me as opposed for a larger market. Can you share some of your experiences on maybe some of the missteps that you made, things that you would do differently?
Oh yeah, I mean, quite a lot of them. The first one I just mentioned, like don't start building something because you think it's cool or because just you have the need. Try to validate that there is indeed a need and that other people also think it's cool, people that you don't know, ideally,
Mm-hmm.
before you start. And again, for me as an engineer, this was a hard thing to do. But I realized that actually, the way you should approach these things is essentially by building a product page first. If you want to be doing B2C or even if you want to be doing B2B, announce a product, announce some features, and see how many people through whatever communication channel you announce it through react to that, and how many of those people you don't know, and then very kindly ask them if you can have a chat with them in order to explore further.
Mm-hmm.
And that should minimize the amount of wasted investment, because your enthusiasm can bring you quite far. And you can invest quite a bit before you realize that what you're building is probably not something that's going to have traction.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I can certainly see, like you said, starting out down a path and then ending up all by yourself. But for just kind of a quick question, if someone's truly building something weird or something that hasn't been done before,
mm-hmm.
How do they go about it? How do they go about kind of doing that market research if there's not really anything to compare to?
Well, I mean, you always have the tension between disclosing your idea prematurely to parties that you don't want to disclose it to, and verifying in the real world that the traction exists. It kind of depends on what your product is. You cannot do it for all products, but even working with a mock-up that you present as a demo goes a very long way in getting the kind of feedback that you need in order to ascertain that the thing that you're building, actually makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
If you cannot do it through a mock-up, then it's a bit more of a gamble. Sometimes that's unavoidable. I suppose the guys who were building WhatsApp initially, I recently saw the commentary in which they were mentioned. They were basically building another chat platform. It started out as something entirely different,
mm-hmm.
namely just a way to set your status and so that your friends could also view it. But when they switched to a chat platform, they didn't expect it to be a huge success because there was a zillion chat platforms.
Mm-hmm.
The reason it took off is that they were using, the phone number as the basis of matching, and they used it for the initial idea as well. So they could kind of see that the initial idea wasn't working, but there was like one good thing in there, and then they started doing something else with it, and they just get lucky. So sometimes you also just have to get lucky.
Yeah, 19 billion lucky, right? So I want to pivot just a little bit and kind of talk about AI, particularly in the context of new startups, right? AI is, like you mentioned, the cool thing to do right now. And for those of us who are just getting started, and imagine that there's an AI component to our app or product, where would you suggest, particularly for business people, where should they go to learn a little bit more so they know who to talk to, or what kind of technical co-founder to recruit?
That's a good question. I mean, AI is new enough not to have been properly institutionalized yet. So there isn't a 1, 2, 3 answer to that. I would guess that the best way to start about is actually to look at various initiatives around universities that try to bring the AI potential that exists in the lab into the world of business.
Mm-hmm.
Because they have the people and they have the programs that facilitate that kind of conversations, and they're actually very much actively looking forward in providing that kind of information, but also providing the context with people and providing in a way mediation between the way that an engineer thinks and that might have CTO potential, and that a third person thinks. So in Amsterdam you have the ACE. I'm not hyper familiar with that landscape outside of Amsterdam, but I know some of the guys who are working on the ACE program with the University of, or actually I think it's all the universities in Amsterdam, but they are housed at the University of Amsterdam premises at Science Park. And I know that they're taking this very seriously, and that they're actually looking forward to this kind of opportunity.
So I believe they occasionally have like meetups. Is there like an ongoing thing for, I guess, kind of geared towards business people who want to get to know more, or is it specifically for engineers and the very technical?
Well, what they want to do is information sharing on both sides. So basically, they want to have business people understand what these young tech guys want, but the young tech guys actually probably have a bigger hurdle towards starting a business than vice versa. So it might be a little bit more geared towards introducing the technical people to the world of business now, but it's by no means exclusively that. And again, I'm not running the program or anything, but as far as I know, these guys are super open to suggestions on how things could be done better as well. So, reach out to the initiative, and I'm sure it'll get results.
Right. No, that's great information. Speaking of kind of AI and also setting expectations, what are some common misconceptions that people have around artificial intelligence?
Well, the biggest misconception is that it's almighty, in the sense that it can 100% automate a lot of stuff that we're doing. And in fact, a pattern that I have observed in my experience working with corporations is that initially nobody knew what it was, and then everybody thought they knew what it is, and then the expectations were geared on the idea that they knew that these processes or these approaches could be handled by AI 100%. And obviously, whenever they tried to do something like that, and unfortunately they were supported in their misconception by, again, young technical people who said, yeah, of course we can do that, because they like the experience as well, the challenges of working in a corporate environment. They would try stuff, and inevitably it would fail. And then, of course, this left a bitter aftertaste. So the other misconception is that AI is a fad, and that it cannot do anything. And these are just misconceptions on the edge. Whereas in reality, actually, AI is quite useful as long as it's well matched, to the process that you're applying it to, and as long as you have realistic expectations in how far you can automate that process.
So maybe just for some more, I guess, concrete examples, what are some things that AI, at least currently, cannot do?
Right. There are quite a few of these. I mean, and most of them definitely fall into the category that AI can do it very well up to a certain point, and then, like, beyond that point, it cannot. So I can give you an example from our own practice. What AI can do is build like a really smart search engine for you. And what the AI cannot do is build a system that not only finds the answer that you're looking for, but also interprets that answer and passes it forward to the customer. Looking from a corporate side, I mean, AI can do autonomous driving on highways really well, and that's been going really well actually already since maybe 2006 or 7. But it still cannot properly navigate crowded environments in cities. So autonomous driving, it can do it within a certain range. AI cannot just take a bunch of data and all by itself, figure out a new market opportunity for you. But what it can do is help you in realizing which data you need to do it, and then in processing that data and in delivering to you the information based on which you need to apply your human wisdom and then decide that yes, there is a new market opportunity.
You touched on something interesting, or at least something I find interesting, is the lack of AI to really kind of put context around language. Is that because most AIs that we think about right now are generally owned by large corporations and they just don't know enough about us?
Not necessarily. It's a technical limitation, a very fundamental one. This gets a bit philosophical, so if I veer too far off in a philosophical direction, please stop me. But all AI systems, all computer systems, and all AI systems included, work with something that is called a closed world assumption, which means that they don't know anything that you haven't put into it, either explicitly or implicitly by showing it data. So unlike a human being that has faculties of just general reasoning, of common sense, really, a machine does not have common sense. So as soon as you start doing something that is outside of the specifications what it has been built to do, or outside of the data set that it has been provided, the behavior becomes quite unpredictable and oftentimes in very comical ways. And this is true for language. This is also true for image recognition. Like, it doesn't really matter which field of AI you look at. This is the big limitation. We really haven't found a way still in how we can bring common sense to AI. When we do that, then we will have omnipotent, omnipresent AI. That's an inevitable thing.
So that's what I need to get my killer robot.
That's right. Or get like you.
Is the lack of common sense really just more of a lack of data then?
Some people like to look at it that way. I don't think that's true. Like, we don't have a good paradigm on what common sense is, really. How do you build a model of common sense? And within the scientific side of AI, there has been a discussion about that since the 1950s. That is still raging. And some people will say just add more data, and others will say, well, use the same amount of data but add more neurons, and then somehow magically the machines will capture everything in there. But the truth is that nobody has proof for their positive claims, and there is actually some proof that mathematically disproves some earlier claims on how to do it. But the result is we don't know. The philosophers don't know, the neuroscientists don't know, and it would be kind of weird to expect the AI people just by themselves to figure out how to do it.
Okay. Kind of speaking of the future of AI, can you give us your take on where you see AI kind of advancing in like the next 5 years?
I think that we're going to see a mass of applications of AI in every single process, whether corporate or private, in which there are measurable benefits to a human AI corporation. So perhaps more abstractly, I see it in the role of really, really smart assistants to do like 70 to 90% of whatever task you want to be doing for you. And that's the boring part, the part that deals with searching data, processing that data into information, even collating that information into more and better understandable information, but eventually presenting that information to you so that you can apply your human wisdom to which direction you want to take it. I think AI is mature enough to do it now. I think that there is a huge, huge potential in application of that, especially in the corporate world, but also in some B2C applications. And I think that it's not even a matter of time. The companies have started realizing it. We see it with the number of client requests and with the fact that they're more and more attuned to thinking in the terms of we have a problem, we need a solution, rather than there is this exciting new thing and we must have it, but we don't really know what it is. So I think that a lot of labor is going to be freed up as a consequence of this, and the work that remains will be more interesting because it will be more about human-to-human interaction and about making decisions, applying your wisdom to whatever the AI has pre-tuned for you.
So, in your opinion, or I guess in an abstract sense, would you be comfortable with a machine making the decision for you?
Well, we already live in a world in which this is sometimes the case, and usually, measurably, machines are better decision makers than humans as long as this decision making is done in these tasks that machines are good at. So it really depends on the task. I would, for instance, be comfortable with having my radiologist at the hospital be assisted by a really smart machine that can, in tests, compared to humans, see better what's in these X-ray pictures. But I wouldn't want the machine to subsequently also be tasked with making a decision based on this information, right? And the reason is that as soon as you have a problem that requires a bit of common sense to be solved, so basically machines are idiot savants, as French like to call it. They're really, really good at one task, but as soon as you have to deal with multitasking and multi-domain, it's probably better left to humans. And if I have machines taking decisions about me, that's the way that I would like them to do it.
You touched on it, particularly with the idiot savant. Certainly AI has a role in making processes more efficient. Do you ever see a point where AI is going to expand into other fields that are normally dominated by humans right now, like creative fields or art or anything like that?
Right. As an assistive tool, certainly. Let's say I cannot imagine there being an independent AI artist. And perhaps I should qualify that. I can imagine that there will be an entity that will be built and marketed as an independent AI artist. But the actual force behind it is the people who are doing the billing and the marketing, right? Because the machine can create unique and original content. That's not a question. That's beyond dispute. The question is, why would it, right? The machine is not imbued with a self-motivation to do it. The machine isn't really self-expressing. So you still have a human that's using a machine as a highly assistive tool in order to generate something that still, in a way, reflects upon this particular human. So that's a bit of an ambiguous field.
All right. No, I mean, it's always interesting because you make some excellent points that there are some things that computers are great at and other things that they struggle. But it seems like that second group continues to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And I do wonder, I don't think we're going to have some kind of Terminator style singularity, but I do wonder what life is going to be like in 15 or 20 years when computers do most of our jobs.
Yeah, I mean, that's a question of technology as much of politics as much as it is of technology, because on one hand, if you make your processes 70 to 80% more efficient at least, and that's with the current state of technology from our experience, from what we see with our clients, that means that you need 80% less people to have the same amount of productivity. So, then the question is, what do you do with this surplus of labor? You have a surplus of production. And if you have a surplus of production that is divided among less and less people, then you might see certain social consequences arising that you might want to address through the medium of politics. So I think that we're going to see some interesting social, let's say, reassignment of social roles as a consequence of a highly increased productivity as a consequence of AI. I think that's actually the biggest and the most pertinent legacy of AI that is already in ascendancy.
Yeah, I mean, so because it makes sense. I think about AI in the terms of like computers back in the 50s, right? Like only giant multinational corporations could afford to have them. And yet now I've got 3 laptops in my apartment. And I'm wondering, are we ever going to reach a similar stage with AI or artificial agents where it's not me talking to Alexa or Cortana, it's me talking to something that doesn't belong to a corporation?
Right. I think yes and no. I think yes in the sense that you will see, as technology gets more democratized, you will see more and more various kind of groups utilizing the technology for their own purposes. And obviously, if you're a member of that society, you're going to end up interacting with that. But on the other hand, I also think that the idea that the processes themselves will remain the same, where AI just replaces some nuts and bolts, that's also not going to be true, because one thing that AI allows you to do is to reshape your processes to gain that efficiency in a way in which, for instance, a lot of interactions become fully automated or unnecessary, or you do it in a totally different way, but you still have the same outcome. So, my guess would be that whatever interactions we're going to be having with corporations, paradoxically, will be even more than now interactions with people. Because people ultimately are really good at interacting with other people. Machines are not, and because of the common sense issue, they're not likely to be. I mean, if you talk to a chatbot today of a customer support agent, usually it can help you with your query to a certain degree, but also your expectations from such a machine are fairly limited because you know that it's a machine. And as soon as the machine cannot solve it for you, it will escalate it to a human. And I think that we will see that happening in a lot of places.
How long do you think we're going to have to wait until we have like a true Turing complete chatbot?
Well, the chatbots by themselves are Turing complete as it is. But if you mean one that can ace a Turing test, depends on what domain you apply to. If you're talking about the general domain chatbot, one that can fool the new variants of Turing test, that's a goalpost that just keeps moving. And the reason that this goalpost keeps moving is that now we're noticing certain things about our humanity, even just the way that we use language, that we couldn't notice before we had machines that could kind of approximate our previous idea of what it was. And as a machine basically beats or comes close to beating Turing test, we start seeing where it's failing to actually convince us that it's human. So the goalpost moves because we discover something about what makes us human, right? I think that it's going to be a long time in the future, and that we're going to have to solve the common sense problem before we can have a chatbot that can, under all circumstances, with all new insights, beat every thinkable variant of a Turing test. That said, having a chatbot that can be an incredibly convincing, customer service representative, because this is a limited domain, I think we're not very far from that. I think that in maybe 5 or 6 years, we might actually have machines that are really, really good at that.
Kind of speaking of that, and pivoting a little bit back to AI applied, are there verticals or opportunities that are apparent to you that your customers are not that they're not asking for yet?
Yeah, actually, most of our product ideas have been in this domain. And recently we made a little calculation on what was the average lead time where we saw something before the market saw it, and it's about 6 years. To give you an ancient idea, we built facial recognition-based interactive marketing panels in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that nobody wanted to buy them because they didn't really see the point in personalizing on-the-spot marketing.
Mm-hmm.
King Corp was something that we started in 2012 in its earliest iteration, and basically it took until last year for this to start gaining some serious traction, where people actually understood the point, like the singular point that we were trying to make since 2012. That you can in a very privacy friendly way find out how your workforce is feeling by having a machine take a look at how they write in their written communications
Mm-hmm.
that you already have in the company. So it always takes a little bit, and that's why we've taken the new approach towards building new products. Like, okay, if you guys have already recognized your pain, that is the moment when we're actually going to start thinking about how we can solve it. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise it's a wild investment. Of course, if you're wildly ambitious and you can find investors that will stick with you for the necessary time, then it's good, because it's good to do it with this lead time idea, because you will be the first to market, and you'll probably have the market to yourself for a little while. But I think that your probability of failure will be significantly higher.
Mm-hmm. So it's really, just to paraphrase, it's really kind of more of a cost risk analysis, right? Of like, hey, if you really want to be the first to the market, that's cool, but there's a high probability it won't work, versus something that's a little bit less risky of your clients are kind of already asking for it. Yeah. But that lead time of 6 years, it's mm-hmm. What is driving that? Is it just a lack of imagination of your clients, or is it like a marketing thing, like you're not explaining it right, or?
Probably a bit of both. We haven't been incredibly successful at marketing, and we're getting better at it now. Mm-hmm. But in the beginning, we definitely were not. But it's also the fact that the social inertia within corporations, which are our primary clients, manifests itself in a myriad of ways. So it's easy to find in a corporation somebody who will be extremely enthusiastic about a new solution. Before that person can pitch that internally and sell that internally to a degree where different departments are willing to change their processes, and then everybody who is involved with that agrees on how that should be done, and yada yada yada. Mm-hmm. That takes a really long time. And then what also often happens is that whatever allies you have built in that process will actually leave that corporation for a different place to work. Mm-hmm. You can start that over again. So again, I'm limiting this to corporate environments because that's what I know. But doing it with a lead time approach, unless it's something that they happen to be absolutely needing, and you just are lucky enough to stumble upon such a thing that they just realized, mm-hmm. It's a hard proposition, to do it.
No, I get it. So, kind of quick question in the same vein is, if we didn't think about the money, so if you were not concerned about the money and you could just build whatever AI wizardry you wanted, what kind of customers would you target, and what would the general theme of your app or your product or your service be?
Right. I tend to have a little bit of an idealistic streak, I suppose, as a lot of engineers do. And what I would really, really want to be building is AI that empowers people to not just basically to be able to individually produce and individually own and operate their own AI, so that they also keep the power over the benefits that this increase in their own productivity allows them. But that is entirely, that's basically the opposite of the paradigm that we're on now. Not just like we as AI Applied, but we as a general, mm-hmm. business technology community around AI, because you don't have the advantages of scale that are achieved through centralized control. And personally, I prefer decentralized control. So that's the kind of stuff that I would want to be building.
Mm-hmm. Is it a matter of money that is preventing this shift, or is it a tech problem, or?
It's a matter of money. So it's a matter of a lack of a business model, really, to look at the entirely different paradigms. So it's again inertia, but inertia, like the prime mover of inertia, is that if you're making enough money as it is, then why reinvent the wheel?
Right. No, I mean it's an interesting thought, right? And it's something I've pondered, but it's also, I mean, it was the guy from IBM who's like, I can't think of why we'd ever have more than 10 computers in the entire world. And it's he certainly missed the mark. And so I wonder if as a society, we're kind of doing that exact same thing again.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I also think it's kind of inevitable that it first happens that way and that it then escalates from an entirely different direction into the right way.
Mm-hmm.
I think, not enough people know enough, not just about AI, about technology in general. Sagan said it well, like, I'm going to paraphrase, but fewer and fewer people know something about technology that more and more depends on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's truer today than it was before. And that's, of course, because technology is also getting more complicated. So even if you tried, you cannot know everything that you would need to know in order to achieve this almost utopic ideal of, using the technology in its ultimate manifesting form in a positive sense immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, you have to go through some strays before you arrive at that point.
Sure. That's understandable. Kind of as a fun twist, how long do you think it's going to be until I can have a killer robot army?
Well, if you want to be a general at the Pentagon, and so you still have time to build that career, I suppose, then probably maybe 10-15 years you can have a pretty credible one. It's not going to be particularly smart, but it's an army, so that's not a requirement.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think it's now a good time that we can kind of switch over to our Q&A. Pete, you want to come join us again? Maybe.
Pete?
There he is.
There you go. We don't hear you yet.
Unmute Pete.
Oh, I did it. Are you on mute? I think someone said in the corporate earnings releases, like, you're on mute is like one of the top trending keywords lately. So I'm sorry I did that. Anyways, yes, we do have a couple of good questions. Here we go. The first one's from Mari. Have you had to think about some ethical considerations when building your products? If so, what has the discussion been like? Good question.
Yeah. So we've been building this product for an energy company, one of the larger energy providers in the Netherlands, where we were predicting which of their customers are going to pay their bills in time and which are not, most likely, and also why so or why not. So if the people who are not going to pay, is it because they don't have the money, or is it because of other reasons? Researching this, one of the things that we found is that the morphology of a customer's last name, which is highly indicative of ethnicity, is a strong predictor for the likelihood that you are going to be able or not going to be able to pay your electricity bill. Now you can imagine how this is ethically something that's very much on the edge. And the way that we have tackled this is by saying, we're not going to use this particular data point unless we can give it an explanatory context. So the way that we gave it an explanatory context is that we also took the address information of these people. We linked it to, so this is the Netherlands, so we linked it to the data from the Central Bureau of Statistics. And then from this data, you can actually see that there are just a lot of people with ethnically foreign background in the Netherlands that also happen to be in the lower socioeconomic categories through, whole different dynamics through no fault of their own. So that was, we could show that this is the case. Like, these people are not paying not because they are part of a certain ethnicity, but actually because they happen to be in a socioeconomic bracket as a consequence of whatever societal forces put them there. And then the second point is, how is a data point such as that is ethically charged going to be used? And in this case, we had a very, very firm agreement, like it's a legal agreement, about the use of the model. So there is only one possible intended use of the model. It may never be used for anything else. And that use is to ensure that those people that fall into socioeconomically vulnerable categories and do not pay their bills in time, instead of what would happen before, have their account basically sold to a debt collection agency, which would do surcharges on that, and which would put these people basically in a debt spiral. That instead of doing that, they were simply going to send a letter to these people. Like, have you guys heard about many different ways that you can settle any debt that might arise with us as a company? So basically, as a consequence of that, about 40,000 people or 40,000 families probably monthly now do not get into that spiral. For us, we did not consult an ethicist on this, but for us, this was an ethically allowable use of that particular data point, because it's actually helping these people who are in a vulnerable situation. The discussion about that basically went along these lines that I just spelled out. So we were very adamant that, if you guys are going to use this model only for that particular purpose, we think that you could do it. But otherwise, if you're going to leave it out, you're still going to get a pretty good model, but not as good as it would be with this data point included.
Kind of a follow-up question on that. Do you expect some sort of GDPR type thing or some sort of regulation to be put in place with AI?
Absolutely. I know for a fact, because occasionally I'm consulted by the European Commission on these things, not directly, just through some, But yeah, I know that they're actually working on a framework that will regulate AI and that will also regulate ethics in AI.
Yeah, I would expect that.
Yeah.
Another question here from Scott. It says, in technology, there's a tendency to kick the can down the road. Familiar with that one? First, computers were going to solve the problem. Then it was the web, then data science, and now AI. So expectations, especially in the private sector, are frequently too high and unrealistic. How do we best bridge that gap so we can build a realistic model during the creation MVP phase?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's one that it's a very practical question. It's one that we've had to solve a number of times ourselves. Basically, the way that we've done it is during the conversations with our prospective customers, we would start off by telling them what is not possible. So, they would start with, we have this particular problem, we want to have it solved, and we say, well, you can't. So why are we at this table? Well, you cannot solve it entirely, but you can solve it partially for that reason. And actually, if you do your expectation management correctly, then there is no disappointment afterwards, and people get enthusiastic, and that in itself becomes the driving factor towards more adoption of AI. What I've seen go wrong quite often is that the people who are representing the technology side there are either salespeople who actually are not intimately familiar with the capacities of technology, so they vastly oversell, because that's what salespeople do. Or when it's technical people that they don't, for whatever reason, but usually because they're not used oftentimes to be in conversations like that, they don't say the machine cannot do that. They just see a task in front of themselves to make the machine do it. And both end up, under-delivering on what is promised, and that creates the opposite cycle, which is discouraging from the adoption of technology. So, like in any branch of business, especially when you're dealing with multiple stakeholders, expectation management is key. It's really, really important to explain to them what to expect, and then if you over-deliver, the better. They're going to be super happy about it, but don't under-deliver, because you're undermining your future that way.
No, I think that's very good advice. Thank you. And then the third question here we have is from Thomas. It asks, do you think that in the next couple of years, we are mainly dependent on large organizations to apply and learn from AI, as they possess all the data required to train the models, right? So, or do you think that there will be more and more pre-trained models, like transformers, we can apply on use cases when training data isn't available?
Well, I don't think that's a dichotomy. I mean, the transformers were made by mostly Google, and there are a few other corporate companies now publicizing similar models. And the reason they can do it is that they have the training data and they have the computing machinery. I think that they're going to be open sourcing more and more models, like pre-trained models, simply because the open source community helps them, fine tune these towards different applications and also discover new applications. Like Google isn't interested in being at every possible application of language technology, but if they see an application of language technology that seems to be taking off, then you can count on it that they will be very quick to come out with their own version. So it doesn't cost them anything because they do this research for their own use. And then when they open source it, they create goodwill, and then they basically create a free market of opportunity exploration, like free market research for themselves. And yes, they're going to keep these monopolies in the future as well, because as long as the data is centralized, the guys that have the data are going to have an advantage over the guys that don't have the data. Once we start decentralizing data stores, once we start doing stuff like federated learning more and more, in which the key is that the user remains in control of their own data, and per case either allows or does not allow their data to be taken in with a particular model or application, that's going to change the landscape, because that situation would mean that if you have a good idea that's, for instance, not very profitable but beneficial to the community, you will probably very quickly gain traction among the users who are willing to open up their data for you. But as long as the users don't own the data, that's not going to happen.
Got it. And we have a last-minute question here from Mari, who actually stole my question that I had as I'm trying to build my own company. Have you founded all of your companies with the same people? And how did you end up with the co-founders that you have/had?
All right. So the answer is no, because with different companies operating on different markets, usually you want to have some expertise in that particular market as well. And obviously, the expertise of the people that I started AI Applied with is highly technical, and now, of course, extended a little bit into different areas, but not sufficiently to just tackle another market. So for King Corp, because this is basically in the human resources and similar sphere, we teamed up with some people that know quite a bit about that. For difference, we teamed up with a bunch of marketing people who understand marketing and visual marketing really well. For the new upcoming project, again, we teamed up with some people in the marketing and the HR space, because that's what the application is about. It's very concrete. Yeah, I mean, in that way, you get the necessary expertise at the table. One exception: all of these companies I co-founded with my best friend, and that's if we are the core of the founders, which we in a way are, that's a function of the trust that we have in each other, and the fact that we have a really good back and forth when the decisions need to be taken. So when you're starting something, also counts for you, Pete. I would highly recommend to at least have a co-founder, somebody that you trust and can bounce the ball with, because I started out that way, so I have never learned the opposite. But I've talked to a number of people who eventually have been fairly successful, but who said that their life expectancy would have probably been 10 years longer if they just had a co-founder with whom they could bounce on these really, really difficult questions. So, if you have a group of people that you trust, to have that as your co-founding team, I think is a really good idea. But it's also a really good idea to involve some people that know a lot about the market that you want to be servicing. If that's the same group, even better. But don't underestimate the necessity for both.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I've heard mixed things like don't ever go into business with your best friend because it could kill your relationship. But kudos to you for going through it multiple times together. But I'm also a bit skeptical of these kind of like founder dating things, right? Where it's almost like blind dating to see if there's a match. I don't know if that really works.
Well, I think that they're an equally apt solution to company founding as Tinder is to getting married. You will get a lot of enthusiastic people, but not necessarily the people that you click with in a way in which you would want to spend the rest of your life.
Pete, did you just invent Tinder for startups?
I don't want to reveal them. I'm still in stealth. No, I mean, seriously, the one thing that really kind of caught my interest when going through all this, it was all super interesting. Some of it went over my head, if I'm being honest. But you said you can see the future 6 years out. So my startup idea is in retail. So I'm kind of curious if maybe there's something that you've seen that you don't want to build yourself that maybe I can get a hint at. We can take this offline if you want. But I do think retail might be different in 5 years because of AI.
More optimized in many ways. So different in the sense that you will need less people to do more, and probably it will be much more based on niche markets than the more general approach that you see now in many cases, because there are both opportunities for people and opportunities for machines to do quite a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
From all aspects, when it comes to inventory management, when it comes to financing, when it comes to content writing and marketing, all of these things are going through automation revolutions, and eventually they all point back to retail, because obviously retail is the source of the enormous web business that's out there. That's the main one.
I did find it interesting that Walmart tried to roll out kind of AI to stock shelves with robots, but they found that humans were better and cheaper. So we're not quite there yet, but I do think the next 5 to 10 years we'll have a big shift in retail in all industries because of AI. I know we're running out of time, so I just wanted to thank you, Bruno, personally for making time. Also wanted to give a shout out to Veronica for being our partner. Veronica, maybe you should just add your link here in the chat, maybe to LinkedIn as well, because you are a super connector. And a final thank you to Peak Capital for sponsoring this. And Dan, I think I'll hand it over to you to wrap things up.
I think you covered it. It's Bruno, I want to thank you for your time. And when they finally lift this lockdown, I'll buy you that beer, I promise. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. And we will be back on second Thursday of January, which I think is the 14th. So thank you, everybody, and have a great evening.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.